So a couple of weeks ago, something happened that kind of stopped me from drawing for a little bit. And since then, I pretty much completely lost my whole rhythm and focus with art. I was still able to draw every day, but not with the same amount of focus that I had before. I'm not fully sure what caused it, but recently I decided to actively try to solve the problem. My plan was just to go back to the basics and kind of follow the route that I'd been on before, which was just working on my skills in an organized and focused way. I looked back at my old checklist of skills that I wanted to improve in and just got to work basically. Today I want to share my process for working on this piece that I painted recently and talk about the things that I learned from it. I plan on making this kind of thing into like a series where I just cover things that I'm studying and speak about the things that I learned. So if you find that kind of thing interesting, then sub up to see more of it. So looking at the list of things I wanted to study, the first skill that I wanted to work on was my values. I practiced values like a decent amount in the past, but I hadn't done much focused practice outside of just like the raw fundamentals. So I did some artist studies with a focus on values just to try and pick up some of the techniques that like my favorite artists use. And while working on those artist copies, I wanted to apply my studies to something original. So I just started searching up random references to try and like come up with an idea. After looking around for a little bit, I went to a website that I saved a while ago. The website's called Film Grab, and it's a really good website. Like, it has a bunch of screenshots from like a big list of movies. Other than just the amount of images that it has, part of the site that I really like is this random post button. It sends you to just a random film, and then obviously all the shots for the films are like composed by professional like cinematographers and stuff. So most of it is just really good references for like composition and lighting and stuff like that. The random film that it linked me to was a film called Mother's Instinct, directed by
Benoît Delhomme.
And this was the first image that came up with the film, which instantly, like, I thought it was a really cool screenshot. I like the angle and like the depth with the ground being out of focus. This screenshot was the main inspiration for the painting. When I saw the reference image, I can't really say why like Casca came to mind, other than I'm just a big fan of Berserk. But I think I could see like the ground behind like this person in the photo as like maybe being the floor on like a battlefield or something like that. So after I decided that I wanted to draw Casca, I just started picking up other references for the character. Another really useful website is this one called Character Design References. The website has a really good section titled The Art of Animation, where it's mostly just character and prop design sheets for like different animations. They have a bunch of other like really useful looking resources, but I haven't like looked around the site that much. But in the Art of Animation section, they have a page for Berserk's designs. I'd already had this specific page saved because I did some like study sketches based on the drawings before. But from there, I collected a couple of like the design sheets for Casca. I also Googled some of the images of Casca for the colors for her clothing and like some variations of the design. I'll talk about why I wanted to gather different design variations like in a little bit. As I painted, I just collected other references like as I needed them. So I had this reference for a sword, some photos of armor for the metallic surface, reference for the hair, and a portrait reference that I kind of wanted to base the face off, but I ended up barely using it. So before starting this part of the video, I wanted to say that I didn't actually plan on like making a video from when I started the painting. So I didn't record or stream a lot of the piece. So there's not really much footage at all for it. Also, I'm not really a big fan of the time-lapse feature on Clip Studio Paint, just because I had some projects that I was working on in the past that like I almost lost them. I think there's a lot of things that I want, you know, like there's a lot of work that I actually lost because it just messed with the file size. I think maybe my computer's just kind of shit, but I just didn't want to risk losing work with the time-lapse enabled. But for future videos, I'll definitely find a way of like recording the process in full. For now, it'll probably just be like a time-lapse from my stream of the parts I did stream. So right now, you're probably seeing like a chocobo in a go-kart in the bottom left corner, just spinning like a million times a second. The first thing I did was just start sketching the figure. I kept it pretty loose, but there's not really much more to say than I was just drawing the figure. One mistake I did make at one point with the sketch though was forgetting about the camera angle, kind of. Because her head is looking towards the camera, I just completely forgot that the rest of her body isn't, like even though that was in my undersketch. So when I was trying to draw her costume over like the basic like undersketch, I kind of found myself accidentally drawing a much lower angle than I intended because I was thinking too much about the details and just forgot about the overall perspective. It wasn't anything that bad though, I just deleted it and fixed it. One thing I've been finding useful though is just adding an extra layer on top with like some perspective lines and a more mannequinized version of the figure so that like I can just, make sure that the perspective's working properly. When it came to drawing the armor, I made use of like the different designs that I mentioned earlier, like the design variation. This character design sheet I saved is from the 97 anime and has like a different shoulder area. I like this shoulder design more just because I feel like the rounded shapes give like a contrast to the straights on the arm. Other than that, I just mostly refer to this 3D model and like this manga panel. In the background, I just decided to add some like debris, like broken pieces of wood, I guess, and like discarded swords. I wanted this to kind of give the feel that a battle had just ended there. After that, it was just a case of rendering things out. I looked at the armor references that I saved for how the reflections would look, but I didn't really stick to them strictly. I just kind of took the main idea from it, which was just like the contrast in metallic surfaces. The dark areas just got super dark and then the highlights are pretty much white. Because this painting's in black and white, I couldn't include like the reflective color, like part of the armor, where the planes that are facing up would reflect like the blue of the sky and the downward planes would be more warm because of the ground and stuff. But I still tried to represent it as best I could with just value alone. When it came to painting the face, I just followed the same lighting scheme that I, decided on in the beginning, which was just top left, which is the same as the one in the reference. I plan to use this portrait ref that I picked up, but I ended up just completely freestyling the face. Like I didn't follow any type of ref at all. One thing that I noticed though was that I gave Casca something that I'm calling a Square Enix nose. I know that Square Enix aren't the only ones that like have projects where like this is like a thing, I guess. But it was while I was playing, I don't know how to pronounce this, bro.
Nier Automata.
There was the first time that I actually noticed it. Basically, the characters just have really, really tiny noses with like no wings of the nose, basically. And I noticed the same thing in like the newer Final Fantasy games, especially when I saw Benedict in Final Fantasy 16. And while painting this, I kind of went down the same route. I think it can look pretty cool and it suits a specific art style, but it's not something I want to be restricted to all the time. I want to be able to paint a range of different looks for characters, and I feel like that specific style might result in me drawing a lot of characters that look pretty similar to each other. Also with the eyes, I tried to do a soft edge kind of thing where I mostly try to, soften the edges around the eyes area. Edges is something I'll speak a little bit more about later in the video. But with the eyes specifically, I really like the look that one of my friends has in her painting. So I tried to kind of like replicate that a little bit here. Her work's really sick and she has a lot of elements that inspire me. Definitely check out her page. I'll leave a link to it in the description. The hair is something that I've pretty much never practiced at all. Like every time I've had to paint hair, I just was super lazy about it, which obviously is not really useful for learning. So for this, I just looked at the reference and I just tried my best. In the future, I definitely want to do more studies on how other artists paint hair and then practice a lot more intentionally by myself. I think that hair is mostly about simplification though. There's a lot of detail to paint that isn't really reasonable to try and paint all at once. Other than those things, it was pretty standard. One thing that I definitely noticed in the early stage of the process was that I was hesitant to actually continue with the painting after finishing the sketch. It's not because I didn't want to finish it, but it's just this weird thing that happens where when I have a sketch that I like, I kind of don't want to ruin it, so I'm almost like afraid to continue working on it. Obviously that's something that you just have to completely forget about. And with digital painting, there's layers anyway, so you can just duplicate the sketch and like save it separately. And also, even if you couldn't duplicate it, bro, the sketch isn't shit, bro. I'm gonna make a million more sketches anyway, so there's no point in being like precious with just one of them. Like I've had that same feeling with other sketches in the past, but now I've completely forgotten about them just because of the amount of drawings that I've done since then. So there's no point in, trying to hold on to things. There's so many mental blocks and fears that get in the way of just making art, which is something that I might talk more about like in depth in other videos. But right here, I feel like I was able to get closer to overcoming that barrier of not wanting to continue on a sketch just out of fear of ruining it. Toward the end of the painting, I tried adding some detail to the background just to try and give it more of like a worn like battleground look. I had just added some debris and like rocks on the floor. I also blurred it out before painting back over it just to try and give it more of an out of focus look. Also, I decreased the contrast of the whole background, just to try and make the character stand out a bit more. I could have continued to try and make everything more detailed and refined and clean, but I just decided that my goal was just to practice values, and I'd done value practice with the piece, so I was just happy just leaving it there. So after deciding I'm done with the painting, I have some thoughts about like what I liked and what I wanted to improve with moving on. So I'll just start with the positives. The main thing that I feel good about with this was the process that I followed in terms of like how I used references and like kept things simple for myself. I feel like I was pretty streamlined in how I did things. For a long time, whenever I tried to make personal work that isn't like studies, I felt like it was cheating if I used any kind of reference, so I avoided it, which I don't really know why I felt that way, especially since I'm like in a learning stage of art, which you always are, but obviously in my case, I'm still at a beginner level. I should be using references to try and help me with learning anyway. Also, I wasn't like super clean with things, but I just kept things, you know, pretty clean and standard. Like I wasn't trying to do anything crazy. Like there's a lot of painters that I see who do kind of advanced stuff, but obviously since I'm just learning, I should just try and get it right first before trying to go crazy with things. So yeah, I was happy with that I just kept things simple and you know, just followed like a pretty standard process. Another thing that I'm happy with was managing to, you know, work towards overcoming that mental block that I mentioned earlier. A few months ago, I might have actually just left the painting in the sketch phase and moved on because I didn't want to like ruin it. But I'm glad that I finished it. Even if it was to turn out horrible and ruined, I don't think that actually matters. My goal with the piece and all the art that I make right now is not really to make the best painting ever, it's just to learn and improve. So trying and failing is completely fine as long as I'm actually doing something. I think that moving forward, I'm gonna try to keep that at the front of my mind and always be like less precious with art. Even if it turns out shit, like it is what it is. I think the one thing that I definitely want to improve with is painting environments. Environments is something that I'm interested in, but I just haven't really practiced it much at all. I did have a period in time where I was using references of castles for value studies, and that was pretty fun. I tried to put an image of a study that I did during that time, but they're pretty old, so it might be hard to find. Another thing I want to focus on is my brushwork. I never actually really paid attention to brushwork at all. It's something that I think could really elevate my paintings. I'm not experienced with digital art as a whole. I've done way more drawings in sketchbooks and on paper and stuff. When it comes to digital, I only really know like the bare minimum. So because of that, I don't really understand how to use like all the different brushes and stuff. I only really stick to one brush per painting, which is either just like the basic round brush or this kind of triangular shaped brush that I got from Virgil. Brushwork is something that I've been avoiding just because I feel like understanding all the digital brushes and stuff like that is just way too confusing, but I have to face it at some point. Something I really want to play with is losing edges or just, you know, different type of edges. I messed around with it in a value study I did of
William Adolphe Bougreau.
painting, but I want to focus on it more in the future and learn how to actually use it. Painting the hair was alright here, but I can definitely improve a lot. I already covered that earlier though, and I don't really think there's much more to add. I just need to practice it more. Yeah, and last thing is just materials. That's definitely something I want to work on. I think I understand like the value side of painting materials pretty decently. That's not me saying that I've like mastered all values and stuff like that, but I just think that I kind of understand the basics of what's going on. I could spend forever just working on values and still have improvements to make, but obviously that can just come later. I think that right now values aren't my biggest weakness out of everything, so it would just be useful to focus on something else that's holding my work back more. I think that when it comes to rendering materials, I have a lot more trouble with the actual colors, so I think that's the thing that I want to focus on. There's a lot of things in like the color side of materials that I've not really studied. For example, like subsurface scattering. I know what that is. Like I've kind of went over it very briefly, but I've not really done much focus study or tried to put it into my own work. So yeah, that's something I think I want to focus on. Overall, I think I learned like a decent amount from painting this, and I have a decent idea of what I want to work on next. Now I have a list of things that I want to cover, but I'm probably gonna focus, I don't want to say definitely because you never know, but I don't even want to say most likely, maybe I'll focus on brushwork next. That's just how I'm feeling right now. I want to do that because of something I mentioned in my last vid about presentation. Like even if I have good values and colors and stuff, I want to be able to present it in an appealing way. Also, I just think it will be fun to practice. And I've started to realize that that's one of the most important aspects to think about when you want to learn something. Like, is it actually fun to just do it? So yeah, I hope this was useful. It was definitely like a good exercise for working on my values and stuff. And I'm excited to keep on working on other things next. So yeah, I hope you found it useful. Thank you for watching. Yeah, in a bit.